Hello and welcome to the fifth Ask Mintos Anything session dedicated to funds in recovery. My name is Undis and I'm from Investor Service. Today I'm going to be your host. With me is Dmitry, Head of Special Exposure Management, and also today has joined Mārtiņš Valters, our co-founder.
Hello.
So for today's session, we have split it in three parts. So first of all, we will start with an overview. Basically, we'll tell you what has been accomplished in the first quarter of 2020, and then we will move forward with the expectations. Then I also will give a word to Mārtiņš, who will then transition from the overview, mentioning also and answering questions about Russian lending companies. And then the last two parts are going to be dedicated for your submitted questions, starting with the general questions about recovering and finalizing with individual questions about each specific recovery case. Dmitry, would you like to start with sharing the bigger picture about the funds in recovery?
Absolutely, Undi. Thank you. Dear investors, very good afternoon to you. And let's start with a high view over the portfolio before we go into single cases. So as you can see on the slide, recoveries have been amounting to 73 million so far. And that goes to against a figure of 152 million exposure at suspension, bringing the recovery rate to the 60%, which is 2/3, which we think is a good result.
Dmitry, I also believe that it would be beneficial to look at the timeline, how actually the suspensions and defaults of the lending companies happened. Would you like to take it over also from here?
Yes, I would love to do so. Thank you. The next slide, the investors, basically represents the timeline exactly as Undis said over the recoveries. So let me just take you through this slide. On the horizontal axis, you have time starting from 2017, where the first distress case Eurocent known to you emerged, till now. And of course, the timeline includes also COVID-19 pandemics, stormy times. On the vertical axis, you have exposure 25, 50, 17, and 100 in million euros. So as you can see, the yellow line or orange line, to be more precise, represent the funds in recovery at the given time. So at some point, as you can see, the peak of our funds in recovery, your funds in recovery, the investors, the peak was during the pandemics, and then there was a gradual decrease followed by a slight increase, and bringing the amounts in recoveries to the figure of 83.7 million euros, while the green line presents a cumulative recovery in million euros amounting today at 73.18 million. And again, its time perspective is included here. So as you can see on the horizontal axis, you see several cases where they stand is when they emerged. For example, a 40 emerged in second quarter 2019, while Volvo, for example, emerged in last quarter of 2021. In the green color, you can see cases which are 100% recovered, such as 40, such as Akulaku, such as Utah Kosovo, such as Peachy, such as Credit 24. In a slightly light green color, you would found the cases which were just partially recovered. For example, eCash, Cashwagon, where we achieved some recoveries, but not 100%. And you also have cases like Volvo, which recently emerged, but hasn't been yet recovered. So again, the slide gives you a high view picture with a time perspective.
Thank you, Dmitry. So each quarter we set expectations for the recoveries. Can you also share with us what was expected before 2022 started and what was actually recovered during this time?
So the investors, again, continuing with a high view, the current exposure is amounting at 83.7. And for this quarter, for the first quarter of this year, our plan was to recover 199, almost 2 million euros. And we have almost hit that target. We've reached a figure of 1,095,000, coming very close to the ambition target we had. And the main drivers here for this recovery were the following loan originators: Finco, Ukraine, and Armenia, whereby we've reached roughly 0.5 million for Ukraine and just above 0.6 million for Armenia. Express credit has also contributed into this achievement over the first quarter this year. Capital service, the case known to you, slightly outperformed, and this basically leads us to a figure of 1.95 million, which we have reached. At the next slide, I would like to draw your attention, please, to what we are forecasting going forward for the second quarter of this year. So again, where we stand, the exposure of 83.7 million, and we're targeting to reach a figure of 1.65 million recoveries for you, the investors, whereby the main drivers will remain the same. It's going to be Finco, both Armenia and Ukraine. We will talk about both cases when we get to single case view, capital service, express credits, and of course, Monego.
Thank you, Dmitry. So to head further, I would like to give word to Mārtiņš Valters, and Mārtiņš will tell us more about Russian lending companies. So we also noticed that you have submitted quite many questions about this topic. So with part of the recoveries update, we also wanted to give update on this topic. So Mārtiņ, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Undis. So as Undis mentioned, so even though kind of Russian lending companies and their exposures are not treated yet as kind of funds in recovery, given the kind of number of questions, we believe it's appropriate to kind of touch upon them. To start with, well, I think many of us know, but just like as a reminder, we are in uncharted territories, meaning war situation. So even though the kind of actual kind of war activities are happening in Ukraine, even that Russia is kind of had started the invasion, there are number of sanctions imposed, number of limitations on Russia, which basically also we could say that like the war situation is also affecting directly Russia. So this is by no way kind of regular market conditions. We have actually kind of put out quite a few information pieces, and our approach has always been kind of be very transparent and provide as much information as possible, so that also kind of investors are aware of what's happening, rather than just kind of being wishful thinking that like every single turn out normal kind of in a very short period of time. So I would suggest definitely kind of also after this webinar to read those blog posts, but I will touch upon like two ones and mention like what are some key implications. So on one of the blog posts, we were looking exactly like what is happening with Russia and its economy because of the sanctions imposed, and the sanctions meaning that some of the banks are sanctioned in Russia. So it means that like European or like some other country banks cannot do like any deals with them. There are companies leaving the country, certain kind of money transfers are forbidden, people are sanctioned, and so on. So all of that is actually kind of impacting all exposures that anybody would have in Russia. So it's not only about Mintos or Mintos investors, like the largest banks or investment funds, or even kind of non-financial entities. So entities that were leasing airplanes, so their airplanes are even kind of stuck in Russia, and their exposures are affected. So basically everybody who had kind of some exposure to Russia, it's more likely than not that they are affected. What those sanctions mean for Russian economy is that basically there are unemployment is very likely kind of to go up significantly. inflation has already stood up. There are kind of big fluctuations in FX rates, and all of that, of course, can also kind of impact lending companies and their borrowers and their repayments. So basically, it means that currently there is kind of quite big uncertainty, especially kind of going forward, how exactly that will first affect borrowers and the lending companies. We have provided updates from some of the lending companies, and when talking with them, we definitely see that they have kind of cut back lendings, they are reviewing their credit scores and so on. So once I see from other market players not related to Mintos, where they mentioned that, well, basically nothing is changing in Russia and it's business as usual, it definitely kind of raises my eyebrows about that. So yeah, that's like, on one part, there might be some impact on borrowers' repayment capability, and that might impact like lending company future payment capability. Moving on, so next we were looking also at how those sanctions already kind of on a more narrow basis are affecting the payments related to Mintos and investors. So starting from the payments which are done by the borrowers to the lending companies up to the moment when this money kind of comes to us and we can distribute to you. Again, would suggest kind of to read it with kind of much more thorough way. But the key takeaways there are is that first, exchange rates are severely exchange of rubles to euros, which is necessary because many investors have made investments in euros, but borrowers have received money in rubles. It's now significantly limited, and there are large fluctuations. I have seen also kind of quite a lot of discussion about that, well, when you kind of just like Google or look at some service providers, it's seemingly that the ruble to euro exchange rate has kind of come down to pre-war level. However, there's like one significant kind of factor you need to take into account. The rate you see there is not actually the rate at which you can kind of exchange that money, because there are bid-ask spreads which are like very huge these days. There are certain additional commissions, and overall it's actually kind of very limited possibility to do those exchanges. On top of that, sending out money out of Russia to, say, Europe, where we're based and our investors are based in euros, is practically kind of limited or not possible because of the kind of imposed retaliation from the Russian counterparts. It is possible to send out rubles out of Russia. However, kind of there is a problem of receiving those payments in Europe. Because like European banks are not kind of very keen now to kind of receive rubles if at all. So all of that makes kind of any transfer which pre-war work kind of business as usual. Now it's kind of basically super limited or impossible. And on top of that, there are related also to the questions you see. So our investors are asking, so why don't we use kind of other channels or like some creative options, be it through China, be it through cryptos? What needs to be taken into account is that lending companies, they are regulated by the local regulated, and there are capital controls. What the capital control means that whenever investment started, all the money flows, they had to kind of be registered with the local banks there, and if they are they can repay it through the same route. If they want to change the route, they need to go back to the bank. It involves also like a communication to central bank, and then the route can be changed. So if you look at any kind of crypto payments, doing it through kind of a regulated entity in Russia is really not an option. So it's one thing if you're a private person and you kind of open an account with a crypto exchange, you add your debit credit card and off you go. You can kind of easily a few 100,000 euros uploaded on the crypto exchange. It doesn't work like that. So the money held by lending companies, it's not connected to the credit or debit card, and like you would not be able to do such big transactions. And similarly, it's like for other payment routes. But I'll touch upon that, like what we're doing. And we, in this article, will also kind of noted out like what could be kind of different scenarios based on our current understanding because of those sanctions. So to conclude on this part, like what those sanctions really mean is that even if the companies are able to have the money with what to pay, they technically don't have like ability, or it's like super limited to make those payments or actually receive the money. Plus, the FX fluctuation could also impact their ability to do that in the future. So what we are doing. So Sergey is also asking, what actions are you taking in order to recover the investors' money of Russian loans? So what we do. So first of all, what I would like to mention, and it's also related to one of the questions about group guarantee for micro capital. So lending companies with group guarantees will not be impacted. So if we look at our exposures and investors' exposures in Russia, this would be micro capital, which has group guarantee. And in a way, it's not directly to Russia, but Belarus, where we had one lending company out in the group. They are impacted by somewhat similar but less severe sanctions at the moment, and there's a group guarantees is upheld, and the payments are done from the group. So that is not impacted. So rest of the companies, they don't have the group guarantee, because in most cases they're just like one company that had been connected to Mintos, or in some cases they might have like some other smaller businesses elsewhere, but the Russian lending part is a key for them. So first of all, we are kind of when they are able to make those, let's say, ruble payments, and we are able to receive them. So that's what we're doing. Then we are looking for those, what was also mentioned in the previous slide on questions, alternative solutions, alternative payment ways. And there's also kind of a very big thanks for all the lending companies who are actively doing that. But please bear in mind that it doesn't happen within one day or even kind of within 1 month, because it requires a number of kind of alternation of agreements, registering those agreements, and so on, because of the mentioned capital controls. So we, together with lending companies, are looking how the money that has been received back from borrowers could be transferred. And the last thing, for given that it's really kind of the money is there with the lending companies, they are not just able to transfer it. We are treating this up till now as pending payments, and for your kind of purposes, and so that you can better see that when you go now in the pending payments, which is implemented in web version, so not in app yet, you can see, let's say, here's an example of the total pending payments, 62 euros. We have for each and every investor, you would see like how big part of these pending payments relates to Russia. And this is also like a reason currently they're not yet in recovery or default based on our categorization, meaning that it's kind of hasn't been restructured within 180 days, or they are not able to cover that money already. Kind of we see that they will not be able to recover, so therefore it's in pending payments. Well, the situation, of course, will kind of develop. We're monitoring that, but at the moment they are as pending payments. Yeah, and then there was a last question, I think, about related to Russia.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is at Peerberry, which is also a marketplace, and unregulated marketplace will use part of its profit to gradually repay war-affected loans. Do you also plan anything like that? You are the biggest marketplace, right? So let me start with the last one part. So we, and also, again, I kind of don't pretend to kind of know everything about Peerberry, so it's better to kind of ask details to them. But I understand, yes, we kind of both operate on similar models, that we are a marketplace where investors come and invest in loans of lending businesses. So based on my understanding, it's also not the kind of other platform, Peerberry, that will be repaying from the profits, but it is repaid from the lending companies' profits or lending companies' groups. So basically, it sounds like just like as a group guarantee, similar to like any other companies with whom we are working. If they have a group guarantees, and the other lending companies, not the platform such as Mintos, is making those payments, and it is exactly as it's now. Let's say for micro capital, it's a group. So there's other group lending companies are doing that. When it goes to like other lending companies from Russia, so as I mentioned, there is no group guarantee. So all of that money should be kind of repaid from them. And besides that, well, we have seen the experience, both kind of positive and negative experience with group guarantees. And in our case, so Russian exposures are just like 15%, so 85% are not impacted. So all of that is kind of going business as usual, and kind of you as investors don't need to kind of worry that the part of kind of Russian loan exposures will impact somehow your exposures in Spain, Latvia, or elsewhere. When it comes down to kind of group guarantee and let's say FinCo, which is what we will be talking about as well, it gives us a situation when there's kind of one of your cash cows are eliminated from the group. It actually can kind of drag down whole group and also impact recoveries for all the other countries. While if it is kind of more distributed as it is to us, and we are not kind of concentrating the risk, so overall, like for investors, it's definitely kind of a much better solution. All right, so that's about Russian loan exposures. So I will disconnect now and I'll leave you in hands of Undis and Dmitry. So thank you for the questions and have a great rest of AMA. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you a lot. So this was a good kickoff for our questions and answer session. So we have successfully moved into the second part and started to answer also your submitted general questions. So Martin has covered several questions already about Russian lending companies and the topic in general. So now we will move forward with other general questions. So let me then start. So the first question is from Mark. And the question goes as follows. Why not set up an independent supervisory board and invite investors to take part in discussions with your business partners who owe money to investors? So first, I would like to clarify some naming conversations here. So we as a legal and regulated entity have an independent supervisory board, which already has set up its kind of duties, and they are laid down also on a paper. So, however, I guess here the real question is about bringing investors, representatives to whom we could actually disclose more information about the recoveries and to see that actually that investors can see that Mintos is doing everything possible for investors to receive as much as recoveries as possible. Nevertheless, we are still here open to hear your ideas. And I would like to encourage also those who have upvoted this question and they would be actually interested in being in such a supervisory board to reach out to Investor Service and to also submit your proposals on how you see this supervisory board actually could basically work. So we are very open and we'll be also waiting then your questions to see if actually something like this we could implement also at Mintos. So then going forward, next question is from Mark. And Mark is asking, which improvements and changes in recovery process and collection process will be implemented from the lessons learned like VOVO and capital service? Dmitry, would you like to take this question?
Sure, thank you, Undi. Well, the investor, generally in fundraising or lending business, there are two important components. The first component is whether you or not have a cash flow of your borrower or of your client whom you're providing funding to. The second question is whether you or not control the assets which you are funding, which you're basically financing. Which are you financing the investors? Which is the loan portfolio? So, as you're aware, Mintos is moving to the investment firm setup, whereby a pledge and thus ultimately a control over the asset which is financed and funded by you, the investors, will be possible. This is number one. So we will have a control over the asset which is funded. The second question is cash flow, and it's a bit more tricky. In some jurisdictions like Poland or Kazakhstan, you can have an escrow account whereby all borrowers' fund would be paid to end borrowers' funds, will be paid to that escrow account, and that means on your behalf, the investors will have a control over the cash flow. In some jurisdictions like Mexico, there is a trust scheme. In some other jurisdictions, there must be other fine-tuned solutions. Thus, Mintos going forward is addressing this topic from two angles: asset pledge, control over the asset, loan originators cash flow, and control over that cash flow.
Thank you, Dmitry. I think we can also then go forward with the next question. The next question is submitted by Lars. And Lars is asking, will you try to restructure existing corporations, for example, with the use of master trust fund to reach more security for the investors? So Dmitry, also in previous question, a bit already stressed and told about the securities, but here I will also answer then the Lars question. And first of all, for you all investors who might not know what is master trust fund. So master trust fund is an investment vehicle that collectively manages pooled investments. And so, in general, we seek enhanced security for investors in all corporations, new and also in existing ones. Some lending companies that did not provide pledge on their loan receivables will provide it in the investment firm's setup. So when we will basically launch the notes. We also seek possibilities for securing cash flows with mechanisms similar to master trust funds. So this is also what Dmitry mentioned answering the previous question. So then going forward, the next question is also submitted by anonymous investor, and the question is as this: are there systematic barriers, for example, national legislation, which makes it harder in certain countries, areas to recover funds? Dmitry, would you like to take this one?
Sure. Well, the investor, as we all know, Mintos is operating in 34 countries across the globe. And of course, in different jurisdictions, we see different restrictions or challenges for our recovery operations. So the answer to your question is yes, there are some limitations. Some of the limitations in various areas where we operate and where we have distressed loan originators, they have some kind of a ad hoc character. For example, in Poland and Ukraine, when COVID hit hard, there was a restrictions on how you do collections and also on how much of fees you can charge market cap. Also, what we have experienced in Ukraine last year, in the middle of the year, there was introduction of a quite severe restriction on packaging collections, which affected our Alex credit case, for example. In some jurisdictions, there are limitations and there are particularities on how you can or you cannot run bankruptcy process or liquidation, for example, yet now. Basically, the investors, we are aware of those restrictions and those barriers, and therefore we are fine-tuning our legal documentation so that such potential restrictions are included and thought through at the start.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Dmitry. Let's go then further. So here we have also collected 4 similar questions which we would like to elaborate on. So I will read all of them. So the first question is, will you finally make a queue of receivables public, or will you keep it hidden, that way every could see their position and when to expect to receive something? The next question is only a few cents. So basically received from Capital Service, Cashflow, Express Credit, Finco, since more than 18 months. When will the repayments increase? Then also other investors mentioning, Stan, that for the last quarter I haven't received a dime. You declared to have collected some amounts, but my turn never comes. So these are three questions where investors are actually asking, they're mentioning that they haven't received anything, and also they don't really understand why they haven't received. And then the last of these four questions comes also from Lars, where Lars is asking a question and also maybe suggesting more, and I will read it. Maybe it would be better to share the recovery amount over all affected investors, like Perbury. So basically, this is more suggesting kind of a pro rata process to basically do a equal distribution. So here, dear investors, I would like to go to the next slide and also actually return a bit back to the previous Ask Mintos Anything session where we were sharing with you this slide, which actually describes waterfall clause in our terms and conditions. So I would like to remind and once more explain how basically recovered payments are amortized. And then also I would like to move forward and give you one example of capital service, how all the recovered funds have been redistributed, so you actually can see how it happens and so to have as much as transparency as possible. So first, first about the distribution. We distribute funds to the investors as per waterfall clause, as I mentioned, and this is described in Mintos terms and conditions. Loans are amortized in a historical order from the oldest to the newest, where first loans with underlying borrower payments are covered, then loans that were repurchased by the lending companies are covered, and finally, loans that have reached 60 plus days late period are covered as the last ones. So here I promised to give you an example of capital service, and therefore we're going here forward. So basically, at capital service suspension, so basically capital service exposure at the moment is 90 million euros. And this is almost for 60,000 euros, 60,000 investors. And the capital service has made payments according to the restructured agreement and has so far repaid us 2.1 million. And this gives us 11.3% recovery rate. What we want to stress out here that even though only kind of 11.3% have been recovered so far from all these 60,000 investors who were affected, more than 40% of the investors in total actually have already received some funds. So basically, almost 25,000 investors have received something. Here it's what is important actually to understand, and what we would like to actually elaborate. If you're looking at these 35,000 investors that have not yet received anything, they have smaller investment amounts in capital service loans, and basically average investments are around 50 euros. And basically these investors are holding only 3 until 5 loans. And so if we are going to those who have recovered more, they are simply have been holding more loans. So there is basically higher possibility that actually the loan is recovered, is paid, and so the investor also has received funds. So here I would like to go a bit further and then give one more kind of illustrative example, so you understand kind of I hope whether how this actually has worked. So capital service basically started to accumulate pending payments with the start of the COVID, when it arrived to also to our geographical location. And basically it was around March when the pending payments started to accumulate. On April 6th, we made a decision to suspend the lending company, and at that moment there were already accumulated 1.4 million in pending payments. So and basically if these pending, as I have mentioned also previously, so we are amortizing pending payments, so basically funds in recovery in historical order, starting from the oldest, finishing with the newest ones. So basically, then the not oldest, but the newest loans are also they basically date back to the 2020 September. So, and basically the kind of the main part of the slide that I want to share is to remind again. So first of all, we are amortizing borrower repayments. So here we have from beginning of the accumulation of pending payments until the last these loans which are dated back to September have been fully paid. The same applies for all the repurchases. And we also have repaid loans which go in part of the loans which are 60 plus days buybacks. And at the moment, the oldest loan from 60 days plus buybacks dates back to the 23rd of March. And basically this then yields us with 2.1 million recovery. What is left for capital service and what is going to be repaid according to restructured agreement is remaining 16.9 millions, and which all of these loans basically are 60 plus days buybacks. And this is already in a process, and as I mentioned, is going to be paid according to the agreement. Okay, then let's go forward with other general questions. We still have quite a lot of to cover. And the next question is, and it goes as follows, it is from Stan. Why the collection speed tempo is so slow? You collect 700 until 800,000 a month with exposure of 100 times that amount. Will it take 10 years to get my money back? Dmitry, this is an interesting question. Would you like to share a bit more light on the recovery speed and what we actually think about it?
Well, indeed, Unde, I think Stan has a very good point, and it's very well understood. If you have money in recovery, you would want to have it received yesterday and covered yesterday, which is again very well understandable. Dear Stan, normally at the markets, you would expect, if you are a marketplace or a commercial bank and you're dealing with corporate distress debts, you would expect your portfolio to be resolved in 3 to 5 years. By resolved is meant that some of the portfolio restructured and most parts repaid within this time horizon I mentioned. Some of the portfolio is written off and closed, referred as a bad debt, for example. Some of the portfolio enters into litigation or any kind of legal route with a longer time horizon. But within 3 to 5 years, you really need to decide on where you are with each of your cases. And dear Stan, again, if you look at the hell of your picture, what we have started with, we have 152 million exposure suspension, where we have recovered already 2/3 in less than 2 years. So we have an opinion that our recovery is actually not slow. In particular, taking into account that with a mostly double-digit euro interest rate, you get a corresponding also risk profile. So we think our recovery is not slow. We're doing good, but we should not stop here and continue exerting efforts to recover more.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dmitry, also for answering this question to Stan and other investors. I believe it should be more clear how we look at the recovery speeds. So, and then next question is from anonymous investors, and it goes as this. When are you going to give us a bad debt so we can do tax declarations? In a lot of cases, I'm sure recovery is like 0%, so no point in waiting for years. Dmitry, what do you think? Is it also no point for waiting or for several years, or you think it's differently?
Well, Lunde, I think the investor is asking a good question again. And the investor generally, the approach, depending on which jurisdictions you are, and Mintos is operating in 34 countries, it depends on whether we can claim some bad debt or not. For example, the general approach and the general rule, you must prove to the local regulator, or you must prove locally within the local system that you have exerted all the efforts and you exhausted all those efforts to recover anything. For example, you've been in bankruptcy process for like 5 to 7 years, and all you could recover is what you already recovered, and there is nothing that can be recovered so far. And there is a document for that from the bankruptcy administrator, for example. And this is more or less the case with cases like Eurocent and Rapido, where clearly we can have enough evidence that we have done everything what we could, and therefore amounts remaining are regarded as a bad debt. We're also looking whether we can apply this approach to other areas of our portfolio, and in case we find this feasible and possible, we will act accordingly.
Okay. Let's go forward with the last question from general Q&A session, and then we will move forward to individual cases. So this question is from Urs, and Urs is asking, could we start another high-risk secondary market where we could trade receivables of suspended loan originators? I found it really good that for Russia it's okay. So here Urs is also asking a good question, and it was also historically been asked by other investors. So previously we did not allow to sell or buy. Basically, secondary market was not available at all for suspended lending companies, and now we also with as Urs is mentioning, basically with the Russian case and also with some previous examples, we have and we are allowing suspended lending companies to trade suspended lending company loans on the secondary market. But if we're also talking about the defaulted lending companies, then not yet we have allowed it. So primary reason was due to the simple fact that markets or the secondary market also works according to the supply and demand. So we see that there would be a demand and there are investors that would like to sell such loans, but we didn't see that there would be actually so many investors willing to buy them. So basically then a market cannot operate basically at all if there is not a demand for such loans. However, we see that this question has been brought up again, and we will definitely in the future also evaluate the opening also for defaulted lending company loans possibilities and to these to be sold in the secondary market. So yes, with this we have concluded the second part, and we are arriving to the third part of our session today, and we will start with the individual cases. So the first one is Vovo, and indeed Vovo is a hot topic, and there's many questions submitted. And Dmitry, the first questions are general ones. So Ivo is asking, what about Vovo? He's mentioning also that 4 months has passed since Vovo was suspended. So what is happening? Then also Dorin is asking our investments in Vovo loans, what's happening? What is Mintos doing about? Would you like to address these general questions and actually give update about Vovo? What is happening with Vovo?
Well, Undis, I think you had a very good point when saying that Volvo is a hot topic. Indeed, the investors Volvo is a hot topic, not just for yourself, for your good selves, also within our company. Let me give you a quick retrospective of how things been developing so far, what we have done, and what we plan to do going forward. So in the end of last year, Turkey was struck by quite a severe national currency devaluation. Turkish lira exchange rates to euro dropped significantly. In such a circumstances, it would take Vovo more Turkish lira to buy the same amount of euro Vovo owes to you, the investors. Instead of passing Turkish lira payments to you via our platform and entering into talks with us how to deal about the FX surplus or loss, what Vovo has done, they have stopped any payments, and in addition to that, they switched off API, which is a system which allows us, it's an IT solution system, which allows us to see when each end borrower loans is repaid, how is all the dynamic going, and it basically gives us a control over the loans where you, the investors, has invested in. So having those two hostile components from Volvo side, we went to Istanbul and we had a meeting with the management of Volvo, including ultimate beneficiary, Mr. Engin Yesil. I was personally there with a colleague of mine from Mintos team, and we spent maybe 10 hours together during several days negotiating and discussing how can we reach a solution. Unfortunately, Volvo's and Mr. Engin's approach was that you, the investors, should absorb the entire loss, the FX loss. To what we said that this is not possible because a current legal documentation clearly says that there are certain obligations we'll have to stick to, and a currency devaluation which was claimed by Volvo as a force majeure is not a force majeure. We have offered in the good faith to enter into discussions with Volvo how could we possibly restructure the FX loss which emerged as a result of devaluation. We insisted that all payments that Volvo is receiving in Turkish lira should be passed to you, the investors. We've also requested information about company's recent financial standing and portfolio, and we have not received anything. We have been refused to provide such information by Volvo. The investors clearly have a situation whereby it's not a Volvo's ability to pay. It's Volvo management and ultimate UBO's unwillingness to pay, which makes it even more challenging going forward. Therefore, after we have exhausted negotiation with Volvo, and the last offer from them was that they would pay 4.5 million within 3 years' time, which is hardly to imagine that is something that you would be investors to accept. Less than 25% recovery rate over 3 years without of interest. So therefore, we are pursuing alternative options which do not exclude whatsoever also legal route. And we have informed other stakeholders such as Volvo banks. We're going to inform Istanbul Stock Exchange. We're going to inform other stakeholders which are relevant about Volvo's unethical behavior. And to be honest with you, in my personal experience, I cannot remember so many cases where the company is able to at least partially meet its obligations, and the management is just using the external shock situation, such as lira devaluation, just as an excuse to withdraw from clearly worded and legally structured commitment.
Thank you, Dmitry, for us sharing overall update about Volvo. Indeed, this is a hot topic that we will be working and we are working with. And there are several more questions, similar nature, but they are more in details. So there's something that we maybe have not yet answered. So let's go then also forward. So the next question is from Tambo, and Tambo is asking, from the last update, it seems you are quite far from solving the questions with Volvo. So this, Dmitry, for sure you covered, but then the next part of the question asks, did Volvo have any hedging insurance? So could you share about hedging? So how it is?
Mm-hmm. The investor, at the moment when disaster occurred, Volvo did not have any hedging. And we discussed during our visit in Istanbul whether this option still be something that it could pursue. But the management explained to us that hedging is not something that is possible at the moment at the reasonable cost for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then also the next question comes from Manus. And Manus is basically asking why Volvo is still operational in Turkey but does not pay its loans. How it can be, Dmitry?
Well, Manus, again, I mean, there are situations whereby your clients may be willing but not able. And this was a situation with some different clients in our portfolio. But the situation with Volvo, it is indeed has good financial standing, solid financial standing. Mr. Engin Yasol has other businesses in construction and energy areas. So clearly there is a cushion for making those payments. It's unwillingness, unfortunately. Therefore, the legal route should be proceeded.
Mm-hmm. And here also Lars is asking that it is basically hard to understand and actually believe that Volvo is not paying anything. And there is a follow-up question from Lars basically about this topic. What are our plans in the future to avoid such things actually, that we have a lending company that just does not pay?
Well, Lars, Volvo was onboarded in 2018, and now we're in 2022. And of course, we already got our lessons learned, as I explained when answering one of the general questions earlier. We should ensure in the future control of the cash flow through escrow settlements, through trust settlements, and also pledge over the portfolio.
And the last question from Volvo's submitted questions is from Philip. And I think we also have touched upon this already, but I will read Philip's question. So Philip is asking, how does Mintos improve the legal framework, collection process for future crisis resolutions? One-side stop of funds transfers like Volvo don't happen again. So, Dmitry, you mentioned here previously also escrow accounts and trust accounts in Mexico. So maybe you can answer a bit more to Philip also about this.
Sure, Philip. Well, it is, of course, we are in the business where we have several external shocks, such as macroeconomic component like in Volvo, or COVID component in many other cases. And this indeed is a stress test to our legal documentation. For example, a 40 case showed everybody that our legal documentation can be solid strong. We have 100% recovery achieved there while pursuing legal route. And going forward, also, we need to make sure that we revise our legal documentation and that we make sure that it should remain one of the best market practices.
Okay. I think we have covered everything from Volvo's questions. So then the next lending company is Cashwagon. And we have here only one question submitted by investors, and the question is simple. What is the problem with Cashwagon, Dmitry?
Well, the problem with Cashwagon is that simply there is no more cash in that wagon. That is the biggest problem. Just to give you update on where we stand with Cashwagon. We have a liquidation process which has started at the level of the holding company Cashwagon Singapore. In the loop of this exercise, fortunately, liquidator failed to include and to start liquidations in Philippines and Vietnam. However, in Indonesia, which is Pirmon, we are expecting, at least we have a roadmap from the liquidator, that liquidation should end in first half of this year. So this would be possible to move this particular case to the bad debt.
Perfect. Okay, as there are no questions, let's go forward. So the next lending company is Finco, and for Finco we have two questions, and I believe that these two questions are similar ones, so I will read both of them first. So first question is as follows. Do you plan to speed up the funds in recovery from works? In Armenia, there are low level of COVID infections, and it is supposed people to have job and pay debts. And the next question is, Your Finco recoveries are too slow to meet any of the previously communicated timelines. Given the related party near nature of the loan originator to Mintos, no surprise. So basically, both questions are about the speed of the recoveries. Could you, Dmitry, elaborate a bit more about the recoveries in Armenia from Varks?
Well, dear investors, I will update on how it goes in Armenia, and I will also have a general comment, which more has to do with the second part of the second question. So in Armenia, we have a very good understanding how collection is arranged operationally. We know what kind of tool sets the team in Armenia is using and what they're doing. And please believe me, they are trying very hard and they have very good results so far. The investors, I just want to remind you that Vark's case is a portfolio which is in wind down, meaning that over the time, the quality of portfolio is deteriorating, and it would be natural to assume that the recovery waterfall should actually decrease rather than increase. We have internal conservative forecast model, which we apply together with recovery forecast from Vark's team, which we receive on a regular basis. And we see that they're doing a really good job in terms of squeezing cash out of this portfolio to the best effort they can. In addition to this, we regularly provide you operational and recovery figures in our blogs update to the investors, so you can see the evidence of what I have just said. The second question, apart from asking about the time horizon, also touches upon that, given the related party near nature of this law, to Mintos, no surprise. Well, the investor, the fact that we have overlapping investors or EBOs actually helps us to ensure a necessary level of commitment of Vark's management really to solve the situation and to repay your money to investors, rather than simply pushing the whole company to bankruptcy, what unfortunately we sometimes see in different cases. So the fact that they have overlapping investors in Mintos, Finco, actually helps to bring more recoveries to you, the investors.
Okay, let's go forward. And then the next lending company is Capital Service. So for Capital Service, I already gave Capital Service case was as an example in the beginning of our session. So, but still, let's read the questions. Let's see if we have already addressed them, or we still have something to mention here additional. So the first question is as follows: repayments from Capital Service are small and take forever. When are we finally seeing our money back? Are they not able to repay more? So then again, next question is, since recovery has started, despite of the fact that I have over 186 euros locked in Capital Service, I did not receive even a cent so far. Why? And also the third one is about more than 2 years, only promises, that's all. Do Mintos plan something? So once more, I would like to express here that we have reconstructed the repayment schedule with the Capital Service. And since that Capital Service is making monthly payments, they're not skipping anything, and they are forwarding everything to us. And this money is then redistributed to you, dear investors, according to our waterfall. And I also showed you in the example how exactly everything that has been received from Capital Service has been distributed to you, dear investors. And those investors who haven't yet received any funds, they simply did not hold any loans that had underlying borrower repayments in Capital Services cases, or they were simply repurchases by Capital Service previously. So the biggest amount of the portfolio, basically biggest volume, is these almost 17 million now that are 60 plus days loans. And basically, they are being repaid, as I mentioned previously, from the oldest due to the newest due. So those investors who haven't received anything yet will receive funds with the upcoming payments. Okay, I believe that the capital service questions also have been recovered but answered. So next one is Monego. And for Monego, we have also just one question from Andre. And the question is, what will follow the procedure with Monego? It is still the case that once the withdrawal is completed, the remaining part will be covered externally. Dmitry, would you like to answer, Andre?
Sure. Dear Andre, with Monego, it's quite straightforward. The company entered into liquidation. The key source for repayment to you and other investors is a loan portfolio. The loan portfolio is in wind down, and every single euro collected from that portfolio, less liquidation costs, will be repaid to you, the investors, to you, Andre, and we do not foresee any additional source of repayment.
Okay, thank you. And then GetBucks. And for GetBucks, we also have only one question from an anonymous investor. And this investor is asking, what is the procedure on GetBucks Botswana and Zambia now, and how are the channels of getting any more money back, and how long will it take?
Well, the investor, unfortunately, we've experienced the fact that GetBucks management, UBO, ultimate beneficiary owner in particular, has been misleading several creditors, including Mintos, by providing confusing, controversial, and sometimes not accurate information. What Mintos has done, we have initiated a joint action together with other largest creditors, and we will continue with pursuing a common strategy with other large creditors of GetBucks, and those actions do not also exclude legal route.
Thank you, Dmitry. Okay, and with this also we have concluded the third part. Basically, these are questions submitted by you investors. And here I would like to actually remind you that each month we have monthly recovery updates. We are updating each and every case once in a month. And you also can visit the recoveries page. We have given it a bit new view. It's also in the development to be improved, to have more clear and more full information about each and every case. So you all actually can have a full overview of the recovery processes. With this, I want to say thank you for participating, for being active community members, to submitting questions to us, and please stay tuned with our next updates. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, the investors.